Episode 4 of Sunrise Star Trek Review. This week, it's the fourth episode, The Naked Now. One of the more famous episodes. It's the episode where Star Trek sort of felt like Star Trek for the first time. They sort of had the characters figured out a little more. They had an idea of where they were going with things. Felt more like Star Trek this time. Well, the premise of it, they went to a planet that was breaking apart to pick up the science team that was on the planet. Then they were going to watch it break apart for their scientific studies. But they got there and the science team was dead. All dead. So they were trying to figure that out while some weird disease kept spreading, basically making the crew seem like they were all intoxicated. It was weird. Sulu running around with a fencing sword for no reason. They never brought it up ever again that he liked fencing, but this episode made it seem like he was a fencer. But he was jacked up, though. He was definitely jacked up. Running around, no shirt on, swinging that fencing sword. We had Joe. We never saw Joe again, but he was the guy who took his glove off at that planet and got the disease. Mr. Spock said, "Expose yourself to nothing." He said, "Oops, too late. I'll just not report that in case I get into trouble." And then he caused all kinds of trouble. Mr. Spock lost for words, I'm sure, when he figured that out. Joe, of course, died in the episode. Mr. Spock and Kirk sent him to the sick bay. He ended up dying. Bones was baffled, completely baffled. He's like, he just didn't want to live anymore, apparently. That was his official report. We saw Nurse Chapel in a featured role for the first time. Mr. Scott got quite a bit of screen time this episode. It was the first episode with Mr. Riley. He went on to have a few episodes and was kind of a cult favorite among Star Trek fans. One of the more looked upon fondly cast members that didn't really last very long. Well, pretty much, they had this disease going. They were going to crash into the planet because Riley broke into the engine room. He apparently shut the whole thing down, shut the entire engine system down, despite the fact there should have been dozens and dozens of engineers to stop him, but they didn't. He just shut the whole thing down, barricaded himself in the room. They broke into the room, had 4 minutes left to save the ship. It was going to take 30 minutes to start the engines. They still got out on time. Mr. Croc crying like a baby. So Captain Kirk was like, maybe if I just keep slapping him hard in the face, the disease will go away. It did not. But Mr. Spock composed himself long enough to help out Mr. Scott and save the ship. They played hard and loose with how long minutes actually take in this episode. Hard and loose. And then they time traveled for no reason whatsoever. At the very end of the episode is the first instance of time travel in Star Trek. Definitely not the last time that happened, but they never really said what was going to happen. They didn't say they were going back into the correct time. They didn't say if there were consequences. They just like, oh, we time traveled 3 days into the past. Let's not do this exact same thing for the next 3 days. And they laughed. Weird way to end the show. A few interesting choice bits in this episode. You had, like I said, Riley's first appearance. You had Sulu running around without a shirt on, looking like he was jacked to the gills. You had the fencing. Poor Joe died. Mr. Scott finally got a decent amount of time. Mr. Spock had what I presume was a tricorder in the early moments of the episode, but it looked like a big bullhorn. Definitely not the tricorder we would see in later episodes. It looked exactly like a bullhorn. Also, the first instance of Nurse Chapel proclaiming her love for Mr. Spock. It would come up a few times during the course of the series. This was the first instance of it. It was a little weird, a little awkward, a little bit awkward for Mr. Spock. course, Nurse Chapel, played by Majel Barrett, who went on to be in all the Star Trek series. Up until her passing, she was married to the creator of the show, Gene Roddenberry. She was also in the pilot under her previous name and a previous hair color. Gene Roddenberry, fooled the networks. They thought she was a brand new actress, which she wasn't. But she got to play Nurse Chapel. So pretty much, that's episode 4.